Okay, so warm welcome from me. My name is Amalayodhin, and very nice to have the intro course in with us at the end of your 6 weeks as well. Warm welcome to those coming in from home. So yeah, we're approaching. We're week something of this series on Milarepa. And Milarepa is this figure. He is a 7th or 8th century Tibetan yogi. Hi, come on in. And Milarepa is very, very well known and very much loved amongst the Tibetan Buddhist community, both in amongst the native Tibetan population and the diaspora, and just Tibetan Buddhism broadly in the West. He set up a school of Buddhism called the Kagyu school, and there's a lineage of Tibetan Buddhism that comes down from him all the way down to us to this day. And Milarepa was famous as a yogi, not as a sort of stretchy one, but a meditating one. So when people talk about yogis in India, ancient India or ancient Tibet, they're not talking about people who sit in downward dog all day. They you don't sit in downward dog. What do? You do something in downward dog. But ones that meditate, basically that meditate all day long. So Milarepa lives above the snow line in the Tibetan foothills, and he's quite a character. He amongst this very, very hostile, barren, desolate sort of atmosphere, very cold. He survives on nothing but a loincloth. He wears nothing but a loincloth, and he eats nothing but nettles. So you often see him depicted, if you see him depicted in art, he's often this sort of green colour, which he gets from eating nettles. You can actually do this from eating too much of a particular type of food. I once turned myself a slight tinge of orange from eating carrots every day, raw carrots every day. Very embarrassing, but I actually did do it. Looked like I'd been sort of tangoed. You remember those tangoed? So I still get teased to this. My granddad, amongst his dying words to me, were teasing me about the time that I turned a shade of orange from eating carrots every single day, but it did actually happen. So off the back of that experience, I can attest to the fact that Milarepa could well have turned a shade of green from eating nettles. So we've been following Milarepa over the last few weeks, and this week the story will go a little bit further, although not much further. And Milarepa will be visited by a group of nuns. So a group of nuns come up to visit Milarepa. So he is a sort of group of people. He's famous throughout Tibet at this time. And when people hear of him, they go up into the foothills to visit him, to get teachings or to make offerings or to bring him food or support or whatever it might be. And this group of 4 nuns go up into the foothills to speak with him, and they're immediately sort of impressed in the sense of taken aback by the sheer sort of desolation of the place. I mean, it is to them just completely barren and lonely, and they can't imagine Milarepa wanting to stay up there by himself, and they say, why don't you come down to the town with us and live amongst people? And that's as far as the story goes. So I'm afraid not a great plot twist today, but I'm going to talk a little bit about that, because what the nuns talk about is that they ask him, are you not afraid? Are you not fearful in this particular place, this very sort of barren, desolate, lonely atmosphere? And I can relate. I mean, some of you probably, nearly all of you, I will imagine, or all of you will imagine, will have been in a place where it's just so desolate, almost sort of to an extent of otherworldly. It can almost be otherworldly if you don't have any other human beings around the place. It can almost be like you're in outer space. Or I remember last year, actually, I was walking with my brother in the Southwest Coast Path, and just around Cornwall. Most of it I mean, all of it actually just absolutely stunning. We got to this spot called Lizard Peninsula, and there's nothing in Lizard Peninsula, basically nothing. It's completely uninhabited, and there's not really much kind of animal life. It's like this big, long sort of moor, kind of heather kind of area. If I was better with my flora and fauna, I'd describe it more accurately, but really, really lonely. And we had sort of about 3 hours of this sort of a big kind of windswept, broad, barren sort of territory, and we didn't say a word. I think we were so sort of just miserable as we kind of crossed it. We were tired at that point. We'd been walking for the best part of a week, and I think we had sort of accumulated tiredness as well. But the whole area just evoked isolation and evoked loneliness in the human experience. And there's a sort of, what comes from that actually is a tinge of fear. That's what I've noticed actually. Where you have solitude, it's often the case that what you'll get is fear as well. And this is people in the True Rattling Buddhist movement, the movement that the LBC, this centre is part of, often every year, for example, go on solitary retreats. So they'll take a week or 2 weeks or longer, sometimes 3 months, 6 months, and they'll go off and they'll be completely by themselves on solitary retreats. So they won't see anybody. They'll turn off their phone, they'll have food delivered to them, say 100 metres down the way, which you'll go and pick up at a time when everybody's gone. So you don't see anybody, hear from anybody, have no contact with the outside world for however long. And the experience of that is for me at least, is always at least tinged with fear. There's sort of anxiety and fear just sort of comes up with that. Now part of that is sort of just primal, I'm sure. It's sort of you start to worry, you know, what will happen or what could happen. But it's definitely the experience of solitude. I remember once I had this awful, really awful 2-week solitary in Snowdonia in Wales, where I went up and I didn't know I had COVID, and I arrived and I realised I had COVID, and then just got like worse and worse and worse. And the other problem was that the food never got delivered, so I got lost in this Kafkaesque sort of maze of administration with the local ASDA, where I could not get a food delivery up to the house for days and days and days and days. It's a bit like Milarepa actually. You know, I didn't quite turn to eating nettles, but the experience of it was so sort of fearful, and it would pick up on anything. I remember on the second or third day, a little mousey tried to crawl up my leg. I was just sat in the kitchen, a little mousey started to kind of crawl up my leg, and I'm not good with mice at the best of time. But that was it. That was my solitary just finished in terms of positive mental states. I mean, there was mice everywhere as far as I was concerned at that point. So every little corner, every time I was like, any mice in here? And then I'd make a racket as I'd come in to make sure that the mice would sort of scatter off before I came in. But I got so scared of these mice. And it was the isolation that was sort of doing it. I wouldn't usually be too bothered, but the loneliness of this just seemed to bring up fear, and of course with any of our emotional states, what we'll do is we'll find an output for it, won't we? If we're feeling angry, for example, we'll find the person to be angry about. If it's not this person, it'll be another person. You might notice this, say for example in work. The person that you really don't like, the person that you hate in fact, leaves, you think, oh fantastic, they're gone now, my whole experience of work is going to be better. And then all of a sudden the person that you really didn't mind before becomes the new person you hate. Yeah? So you've got this sort of background kind of emotional reservoir, well, shall we say, of negativity, of anger. And it just shifts around, it just moves around from person to person, complaint to complaint. And with fear, it's no different. And when fear comes up in solitary retreats, it'll just find something. If it doesn't find mice, it'll find witches in the wood, it'll find tigers, you might be in North Wales, it doesn't matter. Whatever, it'll find something to be scared of. Yeah? So that is how human emotions work. They dwell within ourselves, and then we find something to sort of justify them in the world. Partly it's human beings' tendency to look to sort of fix and try to categorize their experience so that they can find out what it is that's causing something. Our assumption is that the world around us causes our emotional states. What Buddhism would say is actually that we cause ourselves, by and large, our emotional states, in fact, completely our emotional states. So Milarepa doesn't have this experience of fear. He says to the nuns, look, I quite like it here, actually. I don't feel fear. I do my meditation here. In fact, he says, I really enjoy it. He says, I'm quite joyful here. Milarepa sings. That's how he teaches the Dharma. His songs are songs usually of joy and exhilaration and energy and all those positive things. And he's said to sing them. So he has these songs of joy, and he says, and so he doesn't experience the fear that any of us, for example, would experience if we went up, much like the nuns, and said, oh, come, don't stay here. So Milarepa, the reason, well, from the Buddhist perspective, the reason that he doesn't have this experience of fear is, much like Kusalasara was saying last week, he doesn't have this experience of a distinct self and other. He doesn't have this experience. He's an enlightened being. So he's completely broken through any distinction between himself in here, the separate sphere of himself in here, and everything other out there. That's our experience, isn't it? We experience ourselves as me in here and the rest of the world out there, and a firm wall or a distinction between those two things. But Milarepa doesn't experience the world in that particular way. He knows that his experience, his physical experience and also his emotional experience, his mental experience, arises on the basis of the conditions around him, of which other people are part of. And that basically the world around us sort of creates us from moment to moment, and that we're not distinct from that world in any particular sense. We know that, don't we? When you step into a room where everybody's in a certain emotional mood, we tend to sort of pick up on that, and also that mood tends to arise in us. That tends to be the case. We know, for example, physically as well, that we come from the elements, the world around us. We're dependent on food, we're dependent on water for our body, and that our bodies then go back to those elements as well on a day-to-day basis, but also ultimately when we die. So our mind and our bodies are completely intimately connected with minds and bodies and the elements in the world around us. And Milarepa has seen right through to this. He's seen through to it much more than the basis of an idea. So it's you might have understood, hopefully you might have understood that description of the enlightened experience on a cognitive level, on a mental level. But Milarepa has gone much further than that. He's understood it on an emotional level. And we know that's a completely different thing, don't we? Like, say, for example, we know the truth of impermanence. We know that everything must change, that we can be separated from things, that we will be separated from that which we care for and those that we love. We know that intellectually. Because I'm not an enlightened being, and probably none of us are, we don't know it emotionally. So when we are separated from those that we love, we have an emotional reaction, don't we? We resist that emotionally because we don't understand the truth of impermanence at the level of the emotions and our gut. So for Milarepa, he's understood both the teachings of Buddhism conceptually, cognitively, but also emotionally. And in our Buddhist practice, we're always looking to get emotional equivalents for our intellectual understandings. So we have intellectual understandings of Buddhism, and we're always looking for the emotional equivalents of that. That's the real It's the training of the emotions that is the very hard part of Buddhism, because it's the majority of us. Our emotions really are the majority of us. So Milarepa doesn't experience this fear because he doesn't experience this separate sense of self and other. Fear, right at its base, is fear for self. Is fear for this thing that we've sort of walled off from the rest of the world and need to defend. You know, if we say, for example, we have this self, and we think of ourselves as sort of going through life, slightly separate from our experience and owning that experience, and consistent, don't we? We think that, say, for example, okay, we've had a self, and we've had that self when we were kids, and we have it now, and we're going to have it all the way when we die as well. And for us, because we experience in that whole way of self and other, that this self needs defending. It needs propping up. So if we get attacked, for example, say just verbally, we have a very strong sense that we need to defend ourselves, don't we? If we get hurt, we need to defend ourselves. If somebody wants to take something from us that we feel is ours, that we've sort of grasped to our sense of self, we feel threatened and we want to fight back something that's ours, for example. If somebody leaves us, for example, a partner leaves us, that we feel to be absolutely intrinsic to our sense of who we are, we feel deeply threatened, don't we? And there's a huge sense of sort of loss to that, and betrayal, and all the rest of it. So we have this sense of self that needs propping up all the time. It needs constant sort of awareness as to what's going to sort of threaten it. And it needs constant sort of planning and scheming for how we're going to sort of further it. Yeah? So all our careers, all our love plans, all our money plans, they're all an attempt to sort of prop up and secure this sense of self. And of course, because this sense of self is an illusion, it's not based in an actual reality. It's always sort of slipping away from us. It's this sort of sense of security that we're looking to sort of build up is always slipping away from us. Yeah, and so what you inevitably have is fear. So as soon as you have this sort of self and other, you have a defensive kind of posture that needs to defend that self, and then you have a sense of threat coming from other. We have ourself, and then we have other, and then other is threatening to that sense of self, and threat evokes fear, doesn't it? So we're always sort of on the lookout for what's going to threaten us, threaten our sense of who we are in the world, threaten our self-image with ourselves and with other people, threaten all of these things that we sort of look to kind of prop up. Maybe a story actually would probably just sort of clarify a little bit what I'm talking about here. So some of you will know Subhadramati. She was a teacher, very experienced teacher, used to be based around the LBC up until a few years ago. And she tells the story of her friend who went camping. Many of you will have heard this story, but I'll tell it again. She tells the story of this friend who went walking and camping along the what's that walk in Spain? Camino. The Camino. So she went walking along the Camino, and the first night off she sets off anyway, and she walks, and probably she's got like a 10 or 15 kilo pack on her back. That's usually what you'd sort of need to go camping. So she sets off the first day, and she walks 15 miles, we say, and she's pretty tired. So she sets up camp that evening, and she gets into her tent, and all of a sudden she's just deeply fearful of everything that's outside the tent. Yeah, so you'll know this. If you get into a tent, your imagination can go wild as to what's outside the tent, and it's a completely unknown territory for her. So she's in Spain, she doesn't know the area, there could be anything outside, there could be anybody outside, and so what arises is fear. So she doesn't get a wink of sleep all night, right? She lies awake all night long, and the next day she has to go and walk another 15 miles or 20 miles or whatever it might be with this 10 kilo pack on her back, and she's absolutely exhausted. She doesn't want to do it. Anyway, she has to do it. So off she goes, and she walks the 15 miles that day and sets up camp again, and she thinks, well, I'm so exhausted now, I'm going to have to sleep. I'll have to sleep now. I've walked for 2 long days and no sleep last night. What do you think happens? She can't fall asleep, right? So she's lying there, again, just completely terrified as to what's outside her tent. And in that moment, she has an absolute stroke of genius. I think this is fantastic. It's completely counterintuitive. So what do you think she does? She takes the tent down, exactly. So she gets out of the tent, she takes the tent down, she packs up the tent, and she just sleeps on the floor. And poof, like that. She goes off to sleep and sleeps completely soundly the whole night through. And it's completely counterintuitive, isn't it? It shouldn't work. You'd think, no, there's no way that will work. If you're scared of what's outside, you don't then go and sleep outside. But I thought it's a really, really excellent example of how the thing that we use when there is division there between, say, in this instance, it's between inside and outside, or between self and other in the instance of unenlightened human beings. There's fear. As soon as there's division, there's fear. When you take down that wall, that barrier, the fear goes. So what we actually counter completely sort of what we ironically do in looking to secure this sense of self, so having enough money for this sense of self, having a nice home for this sense of self, having the nice romantic partner for this sense of self, or the nice handbag or the car, whatever it might be, whatever it is that shores up this sense of self, to create this sort of false sense of security for us, it actually doesn't create security, it actually creates fear. That's what Milarepa is saying. He's saying, I've completely gone past this idea of self and other. I've completely transcended that. I don't have a me in here and an other out there. And so the sense of insecurity that comes from that is completely gone. The Buddha used to, when he said actually, one of the things that the Buddha talked about, fear arising on the basis of, he often says it arose on the basis of violence. He talked about those that take up rods and weapons and sticks and arrows. He said what arises on the basis of that is fear. And because violence is the ultimate expression of self and other, isn't it? It's the ultimate expression of threat. We only get into violence when we feel threatened. So as soon as we're into a situation, a context of violence, we're in a very, very strong context of self and other, and two sort of opposing interests there. And we're in a very, very strong context of threat. So we're feeling we have to now defend self and attack other. And of course, what arises on that is the basis of fear. I always remember I used to compete in mixed martial arts and Thai boxing, mixed martial arts sometimes called cage fighting, way back in many moons ago, and I always would clock actually that the predominant atmosphere in a lot of these fight shows, particularly amongst the audience, was this sort of ripple or atmosphere of fear that would sort of just flow through it. Now, for competitors in that sport, it's not an act of violence, but oftentimes for a lot of people watching something like that, what they think they're watching is a fight, in that sort of, like you'd see a street fight or something like that. And so what happens, what arises is it's a violent, there's a sort of a smell of kind of violence in the air, and what arises upon that is fear. My coach often used to comment on it, actually he called it fear masked as aggression. So you get lots of these sort of young men at these fight shows, and you got lots of sort of fights breaking out in the audience and things like that. That would be common. There was a riot at my first professional fight. But it arose on the basis of the sort of what they thought as the sort of violent spectacle that they were watching. The fear arose upon that, and then to sort of cover that over, you'd have this sort of charade of aggression that would sort of go over it. So that I can definitely sort of relate to that teaching, actually, on the basis of violence arises and taking up weapons, taking up bow and arrow, as the Buddha would have said. We have our own equivalent now. Arises fear, but obviously on the basis of a very, very strong experience of self and other. So it's interesting because I think the more that we try to create this sense of security for ourselves, the more actually that what tends to happen is we get fearful of that sort of, we get fearful. The more we try and create security for ourselves, the more sort of fearful we get. You need to go up the button, Satchidanasa. Yeah, there you go. Yeah. Thanks. I remember sometimes you could go around London, can't you, and you sort of see, if you go into very kind of wealthy areas of London, you'll see some of the most beautiful, like ornate houses, won't you? And like the most amazing cars. And I shouldn't say this as a, I don't think as a Buddhist you're meant to like really nice, beautiful cars and like these amazing houses. And sometimes I go around like these really nice parts of London. I could just walk around them all day, just looking at gardens and people with incredible fashion on and these amazing clothes and these yada yada whatever, and sometimes I think that I actually enjoy their wealth more than they enjoy it themselves, because they seem quite worried about it. It seems to provoke quite a bit of anxiety amongst them. So some of them have, you'd think if they could put a moat and a crocodile around the house, they'd probably do that. They have these big gates that go bush, and all these security systems outside and everything like that. And it looks like it's fearful from the inside of that. It looks like it's desperately fearful. And of course, they have this very sort of cultivated sense of self. And in a sense, there's nothing wrong with that, actually. There's nothing wrong with accumulating riches in Buddhism. It's not said to be problematic. But one of the things that can sort of arise from it is this very strong, tense sense of me and what's mine. And we have that as well. We're all extremely wealthy here by global standards. Insanely wealthy here by global standards. We do that as well. So you can see how this sort of trying to build security actually comes with it a sense of fear for that thing that we've sort of gathered, and a sense of sort of threat to it ever being sort of taken away. I think actually as a society, as we've become more secure and more safe, we have got actually just more and more averse to risk any sort of thing that might sort of threaten our safety. You see this, don't you, now, say for example, in how children are brought up. There was a time when kids were just thrown out the door and said, off you go, just go play. It apparently just doesn't happen anymore. Kids basically are brought up inside, and there's always this sort of fear of something that, terrible that might happen to, even though crime is way down from what it was however many years ago. Accidents are way down from what it was every years ago. But it seems like the more secure that we get, the more risk averse that we become. You saw this in COVID a bit, didn't you? Where it's like whenever suddenly there was threat. Now, I would imagine COVID probably presented no more threat than would have been absolutely standard, say 50, 60 years ago. It was really not unusual, say in Ireland, for example, for whole families to die over a very, very short period of time of things like polio, or various other things. That polio was only eliminated in Ireland some, I think, 50, 60 years ago. There was a poet here actually who was interviewed by Maitreya Bandhu not long ago, and the neighbours just died where he was from. He was from actually a place not far down the road from me in Cork in Ireland, and his neighbours, there was a farming community, his neighbours just died over the space of a month, I think all from polio. And so, and society just lived with a level of risk. And now, even though we've become insanely safe and insanely secure by historical and global standard, we seem to sort of become more and more risk averse with that. And we less and less want to take even small risks. Jonathan Haidt talks about this. You might have heard of him. He talks about the coddling of the American mind. And he talks about this culture of sort of safetyism. And safetyism is a culture that tends to prioritize both physical and emotional safety, almost as a sort of sacred virtue, that it becomes the prime value within society to be safe. I don't think any sort of healthy society would recognise that to be a prime value. It certainly wouldn't have been recognised as being a prime value in ancient Tibet, India, anywhere like that. I think it probably would have been seen as a little bit sickly. It would be my guess. But we have this sort of value or this culture of safetyism that sort of tends to emphasise reducing risk at all cost. So you can see how the more that we sort of become safe in a certain way or secure in the self and other, in a sense we just experience more and more fear. I was talking to a friend recently. He said somebody asked him if the LBC was a safe space. And he said he just wanted to know if the LBC was a safe space. It was Maitreya Bandhu actually he was talking to. And Maitreya Bandhu said, look, of course it's not. Of course it's not a safe space. As soon as you have human beings, you have not safe space. Yeah? That is just the reality. And Buddhism would say that as well. It would say that, look, this security that we look for, this safety that we look for with partners and pay packets and houses and mortgages and pensions does not exist in this world. Security in that sort of way is not available in samsara. Samsara will eventually, this world that we all co-inhabit, this unenlightened world that we all co-inhabit, samsara will eventually take everything from you. Yeah? It will take all this thing that you deem as secure, it will take it from you. That's not to say that it's the end. Buddhism doesn't teach that that's the end. But it will take it from you. Everything, all these castles that we build, it will eventually go. You can go to the gym. I'll take an example that's close to my heart. I can go to the gym. I can do an hour on the rower every single day. I can lift weights another day. I can do yoga another day. I can take all the supplements I like. I can watch my diet. I can get 8 hours of sleep. And eventually, my body will betray me. Yeah? It will betray me. I will get old. It's already happening. My hairline has already betrayed me. Soon, the rest of my body will betray me. It won't be long. So this sort of, and you see this now, don't you? Sort of see a cult of body developing again. I think it's this attempt to gather security and to push back death. This idea that we're only one exercise routine, one diet routine, one sort of sleep routine. People have sleep stacks now. Have you heard of this? It's like all the things that they take and do before you go to bed for a good night's sleep. Just go to bed, for crying out loud. You know, like don't worry about it. Nothing could give me a more restless night's sleep than a sleep stack. You know, to try and get to sleep. You know, don't worry. Anyway, but you can do all of these things, and eventually your body will betray you. So there's no security there in samsara. That's what Milarepa would say. That's what the Buddha would say. That this place that we look for security outside us, in that particular sense, it's impossible. It can't do the thing that we want it to do. That's not to say that you take stupid risks either. But the security that we look for in gathering and accumulating and protecting and throwing up our walls, by metaphorical or literal, will not work. Yeah? It won't work. The danger, actually, I think, as we get older, is we start to really become more and more averse to risk. I think one of the fantastic things about adolescence, and sometimes Sangharakshita, the man who founded this movement, he talked about maintaining a sense of positive adolescence right through your adult years. He said Buddhism is for young people, young in heart, basically. You can be old way before your time, and you can be young way into your elderly years at heart. Yeah, and part of, I think, of this sense of positive adolescence that we need to keep a hold of is this capacity to step into or dialogue with what's risky or with what's dangerous. So for kids, for example, I think it's very, very important that you let them take risks. That you let them climb trees, that you let them cycle a bike without a helmet, whatever it might be, that you start to engage from quite a young age in risk and start to learn to see where the sort of boundaries are that you want to sort of work with that. I think it's important to keep that into our adult lives as well, and continue to sort of take risks in communication with your friends, for example, or take risks in trying something that might not work out, take risks in going somewhere that you don't know. All of those things, just continuing to take risks as you get older, I think very, very important in terms of staying energetic and sort of have that sort of positive sense of youth. Does anybody have any questions on that just before I go on? Yeah. Over here at the back. Yeah.
Is there a sense of security in sort of, joining Buddhism? Which I kind of.
Yeah. This is good.
I think you left a place of risk from fighting.
Yes, that's right. Yeah. So it's a good question. So is what's your name?
Jim.
Jim, thanks for your question, Jim. So what Jim asked was that, where can you look for security within the Buddhist perspective? I think it's a good question. So what the Buddha would say is that, look, there are things that you can rely on. You can rely on, say, for example, that if you look to cultivate more and more positivity in yourself and in the world outside of you, around you, you will benefit from that in your life. That will always come back to you. So what Buddhists describe that as the iron law of karma. So karma for Buddhism, it's slightly different from the way it's sometimes understood, but it's basically meant that if you act from a positive mind, from a skillful mind, that there will be positive repercussions. If you act from a negative mind, that there will be negative repercussions or consequences from that. So what the Buddha would say is, look, you can put your faith in what is secure is more and more generosity, more and more love, more friendliness, less craving, more courage, all of those things. So actually you can cultivate that through all the practices that Buddhism have or has, meditation, ethics, all of those things, and it will have a positive repercussion. Does that answer the question? Yeah, good. Okay, thanks, Jim. There was somebody else, yeah.
Yeah, so like in terms of kind of as you get older, maybe you naturally accumulate some of those sorts of things that I guess like the cliche term is that start to own you. Like how would you say? What kind of approach can you take to, I don't know, maybe enjoy those things without the kind of the downside?
Yes, yeah. Well, traditionally Buddhism would say you leave it all behind. You just sort of, you get rid of it and you go. Now, of course, for most of us, we're not in a situation where we can kind of do that. Neither do we necessarily have the society around us that sort of, that will support that type of thing anymore. So it's not going to be the right thing for all of us. I think probably it is still a case of making sure to give things away, to be generous, so that where we have accumulated a certain amount of wealth, and of course Buddhism would say, look, there's no problem with that, particularly amongst his lay followers, the Buddha said, here's how you accumulate wealth. He actually sort of told them, look, here's how you can do it. It was particularly from ethical behaviour, he thought was the way to do it. But I think the important thing that we can do is, okay, look, we accumulate wealth. We have pensions, we have a mortgage, whatever it might be. Let's be absolutely sure to be generous as well, so that we don't, what generosity does is it makes it a less sort of tight and fearful relationship with the world. You ever seen that sort of people who aren't generous or who are really just tight? They've got this really kind of tight, kind of fearful, kind of grabby, everything's a threat to them. So one of the things that we can do is just be more open-handed in our generosity, I think, and that starts to create a relationship with the world that's more fluid in that particular sense. There's less kind of, it's mine, and keep that away, I think. Yeah. Is that? Yeah. Okay, so I'll keep going. So I think probably one of the part of what Jim was getting at, it's partly answered the question that actually where we can find security is much more within. And Milarepa starts to say, he says, look, I don't fear the loss of these things because I have this internal resource that I can turn to, which it sustains me. I don't fear the loss of a romantic partner, for example, because I have a sort of completion within myself that sort of sustains me. I don't particularly need validation in that particular way. I don't fear the loss of external wealth because I have an internal wealth that sustains me. So what Milarepa is saying is that actually these things that we look for outside of us to bring us validation, to bring us security, to bring us a sense of positive relationship to ourselves, none of those things external can actually do that. We need to actually be able to do that for ourselves. It has to be internally cultivated to be able to do it. So that's what Milarepa has said that he's done. So I'll finish actually by just saying, because one of the things that's most sort of valued in Buddhism is said to be the gift of fearlessness. The gift of fearlessness. And sometimes you might see, actually I think when you come in here, the Buddha, certainly the Buddha in the small shrine room, I think the Buddha as well, just in the doors you walk in, is making this mudra of fearlessness. So this mudra here, this gesture here, is said to be the gesture of fearlessness. And it's often said to be the greatest gift that you can give in Buddhism. It's the most highly valued gift that you can give, is this gift of fearlessness. And we know that, don't we, when we've experienced that from other people. When, say, for example, you're in an anxious situation or something's going wrong, and all of a sudden somebody sort of arrives and they just change an atmosphere. They've got a sort of this ability to have this gift of fearlessness. They turn up and you just think, everything's going to be okay. So Buddhism really, really values that and really sort of highlights it. So I think the overcoming of fear is a very, very important part of the Buddhist path. I've always had a really kind of poor relationship with my own fear in a lot of ways, actually. It's one of the things that I've really had to work on down through the years. I said, I gave the example a few weeks ago of I was in the gym a little while ago and a bit of a tense interaction happened between me and another gym goer. And eventually I said, whatever. He wanted me to put one weight somewhere else. I didn't think it belonged there. He thought he did. Anyway, it was starting to escalate. And eventually I just said, whatever, I'll move it. So I shifted it off over to where he wanted it to go. And immediately, of course, because in any sort of tense interaction you get an experience of fear, don't you? It comes up. But for me, because my experience of fear, I have such a poor relationship with my own fear, it all comes sort of wrapped up with a lot of guilt, with a lot of shame, with a sense that I've been sort of got the better of, or sort of bested, and that all gets sort of wrapped up in this kind of whirlwind that can just carry me along actually for quite some days. When I was a teenager, I used to sort of get into scraps, as one does sometimes as a teenager, and sometimes I couldn't sort of contain the emotion in that, and I'd sort of burst into tears, and I'd be so, when I was growing up, I was so humiliated by this as a young man, so humiliated by my sense of fear, and that's actually a lot of what kind of brought me to fighting later on. I was sort of so kind of humiliated by my sort of, for me, I thought that this must mean that I'm a coward, which was sort of this desperate sort of relationship with my own fear. So I think one of the things that what I've had to do actually as I've practiced is become more and more better dialogue with my own fear, which of course means understanding that I have fear, accepting that I have fear. It's part of the human experience to have fear. And just sort of getting into a dialogue more and more with that, and being less and less sort of ashamed of it. So I think for a lot of us, we have to start engaging with our sense of fear. For a lot of us, fear drives us to do some really silly things. What I notice, for example, under a lot of people's anger is this sort of background noise of fear and threat a lot of the time. And of course, we're not going to be able to get a grips with that anger until we sort of get a grips with that sense of fear under it. So I think what Buddhism would say is that we need to start experiencing more and more of our fear, not pushing it away, relaxing into it. And of course, this is a role for meditation, isn't it? That's where we experience it.